I was still standing when everyone else started clapping. The sound filled the conference room like something rehearsed, too synchronized, too comfortable, like people who had practiced this exact moment and were finally getting to perform it. My wife Isabella raised her glass high, smiling like we were celebrating something extraordinary, something long overdue. The light caught the champagne in a way that should have looked beautiful. It did not. "To the future," she said loudly, her voice carrying over the applause, over the clink of glasses, over everything. And to the man who was always meant to lead it. She turned. Not toward me. Toward my stepbrother Alejandro. Then she kissed him. Right there, in front of my father's entire business network, in front of the lawyer, in front of the people who had watched me grow up in this company. On the mouth. Long enough that I counted 3 full seconds in my head before it ended. Long enough that no one in that room could pretend they had not seen it. I waited for someone to gasp. To look shocked. To say something. To look at me with any expression that resembled surprise. No one did. My stepmother Carmen sat perfectly still at the far end of the table, watching me with cold, measured eyes. The kind of eyes that are already calculating your next move before you have made this one. The lawyer, Senor Vargas, cleared his throat quietly and shuffled the papers on the table in front of him. My father's business partners looked down at their phones. Some of them refilled their glasses. Like this was normal. Expected. Like they had all known the program and I was the only one who had not received a copy. Isabella pulled away from Alejandro and smoothed the front of her dress with both hands. A small, neat gesture. He smiled at her, slow and satisfied, then glanced at me with something that looked almost like pity. The kind you feel for someone who has just embarrassed themselves without knowing it. Senor Vargas stood up. "If we're ready," he said quietly, his voice professionally neutral, "we can proceed with the formal transfer of authority." My hands felt numb. My throat was dry and tight. I opened my mouth but nothing came out. Not anger. Not a question. Not even my name. "The documents are prepared," the lawyer continued, as if I had not tried to speak. As if I were furniture. I looked around the room again, slowly this time, searching for one person who seemed uncomfortable. One face that showed hesitation. One pair of eyes that would not quite meet mine because they felt some measure of guilt about what was happening. There was nothing. Not one crack in the surface. My father's oldest friend, Senor Torres, sat near the corner with his arms crossed and his jaw tight. He had known me since I was 6 years old. He had taught me to play chess in this very building, in a small office on the 4th floor where my father used to keep a board. Now he stared at the table like it held something interesting. Like I was not standing 12 feet away from him, looking directly at him. Isabella's parents sat near the window. Her mother was checking her fingernails. Her father had his tablet propped against the water glass and was scrolling through something. Neither of them looked up. My stepmother Carmen leaned toward me slowly, like a woman with all the time in the world. She smelled like expensive perfume and wine, the particular combination I had always associated with the end of long evenings. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Don't make this uglier than it needs to be." Uglier. As if I was the one who had done something wrong. As if I was the problem standing in the middle of a situation that someone else had designed and executed while I had been going about my life trusting all of them. Senor Vargas pulled out a thick folder and spread papers across the conference table in a practiced, unhurried way. I saw my father's company logo printed at the top of each page. Official seals. Legal language in small dense columns. The kind of document that takes months to prepare. Then I saw the signature lines at the bottom. Some were already filled in. Black ink. Neat, careful handwriting. I recognized Isabella's signature immediately. The way she made the distinctive loops in her I and B, the small flourish she always added at the end. I had watched her sign our marriage certificate 2 years ago at a small table in a government office with a potted plant in the corner. I had thought it was the beginning of something. She had already signed these documents. Before this meeting. Before the kiss. Before any of it. Before I had even walked into this room today not knowing what was waiting. I grabbed Isabella's arm and pulled her into the hallway outside the conference room. My hand was shaking. I could feel my pulse loud in my throat. The door swung shut behind us and cut off the sound of the room, the glasses, the low professional murmur of people who knew things I did not. She did not resist. She just followed me out and then stopped, arms at her sides, and waited. Like she had already been through this conversation in her head many times and was simply now sitting through the live version. "What was that?" I said. My voice came out louder than I had meant it to. It echoed slightly off the marble hallway floors. She looked at me the way you look at a child who was upset about something that, from the adult's perspective, was inevitable. Annoyed. Faintly bored. "You were never supposed to find out this way," she said. "Find out what?" I said. "That you're kissing my stepbrother in front of my father's entire business network? In front of our lawyer? In front of everyone who has known me for 15 years. She sighed. Actually sighed. A long, tired exhale like I was asking her to explain long division. "This marriage," she said slowly, choosing each word with deliberate precision, "was part of an agreement." I stared at her. The words did not make sense together. Marriage. Agreement. I turned them over, looking for the angle that made them fit. "What agreement?" I asked. "Your father needed my family," Isabella said. Her voice was flat now, businesslike. "Their connections across the region. Their protection with the trade authorities. Their money when his liquidity dried up in 2019. She paused just long enough to let that land. I was the price of that arrangement. The hallway felt like it was slowly tilting. I put my hand against the wall to steady myself. The marble was cold. "You married me because..." "Because it was arranged," she interrupted. Not harshly. Just factually, the way you correct a misunderstanding. "But you were never part of the long-term picture. You were just necessary at the time. A placeholder who didn't know he was a placeholder." I walked back into the conference room. My legs felt disconnected, like they belonged to a version of me that was operating on a slight delay. The room had not changed. The glasses were still raised. The papers were still spread on the table. The lawyer was still standing. But Alejandro was sitting in my chair. The leather chair at the head of the conference table. The one I had occupied during every strategy meeting for the past 4 years. The one my father had sat in for 20 years before that. Alejandro had files spread in front of him, my files, the quarterly reports I had spent 3 weeks building, the projections I had triple-checked and rechecked because my father always said the numbers had to be bulletproof. He was flipping through them with a red pen in his hand, making small marks in the margins the way you annotate something that belongs to you. He looked comfortable. Natural. Like a man settling into furniture that had always been his. "The Q3 projections are off," he said to Senor Vargas, not looking up from the pages. "I'll need these recalculated by Monday with the revised shipping costs included." "They're accurate," I said. My voice came out smaller than I intended. "I verified every number against 4 sources." Alejandro glanced up at me. Just briefly. Then back to the papers. "You should have seen this coming," he said quietly. It was not cruel. Not triumphant. Just a simple observation, the way you might tell someone their train had already left. I looked at Carmen one more time. She was watching me with the same cold, patient expression she had worn since the moment I walked in. She was waiting to see what I would do. They all were. The whole room had been constructed around that single question. I turned and walked out. I drove home in absolute silence. The radio stayed off. The windows stayed up. The city moved past me in a blur of lights and motion that felt utterly disconnected from the inside of my car, from the inside of my chest. I could hear my own breathing. I focused on it because it was the only thing that felt real. When I opened the front door of our house, everything looked exactly the same. The photos on the hallway wall. The furniture Isabella had spent months choosing with the careful attention of someone who genuinely cared about the life she was building. Her jacket hanging by the door on the hook she had asked me to install. But it all felt different now. Staged. Constructed. Like walking onto a film set after you have already seen how the movie ends. I walked into our bedroom and stood in the center of it for a long moment. Her side of the closet was full of her clothes, organized by color the way she always kept them. Her makeup was arranged in precise rows on the bathroom counter. Her slippers were placed neatly beside the bed. I opened her nightstand drawer. I do not know exactly what I was looking for. Some explanation. Some note. Some evidence that at least part of it had been real. Inside the drawer were papers folded neatly inside a manila envelope. My hands were steady now. Strangely, completely calm, like the shaking from earlier had burned through and left something cold and clear behind. I pulled out the envelope and opened it. The first page was titled Petition for Dissolution of Marriage. Divorce papers. Complete, formal, ready. I flipped to the signature page. Isabella's name was already there in her careful handwriting, the same loops and flourishes I had recognized on the company documents in the conference room. Dated 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks. Before today. Before the meeting. Before the kiss in front of everyone. She had signed divorce papers before any of this happened, filed them away in her nightstand, and then come home to sleep beside me for 3 more weeks without saying a word. Below her signature was a blank space for mine. Waiting. Like she already knew I would sign eventually. Like my agreement was just a formality, a final step in a process that had already been decided. I drove to my stepmother's house that night. The large estate on the hill where she had moved after my father died, the one she had always loved more than the city apartment they kept for business. The lights were on in the library. I could see them from the bottom of the driveway. Carmen answered the door herself. There was no surprise on her face. She had been expecting me, the same way she seemed to have expected everything else today, with the particular calm of someone who has done a great deal of planning. "Come in," she said. We sat in the library. She poured herself wine from a crystal decanter without offering me any and settled into the chair across from me like a woman who was comfortable in her position in every sense. "Why?" I asked. Just that one word. I did not trust myself with more. She took a slow sip and looked at me over the rim of the glass. "Because you were emotional," she said. "Sentimental. Not built for the kind of world your father actually lived in. Not the world he let you believe he lived in, the real one." "My father built me for this," I said. "He trained me from the time I was 19 years old. He taught me everything he knew." "Your father was sentimental," Carmen said, with something that was almost fondness and almost contempt in the same breath. "He wanted very badly to believe you could handle it. He wanted to give you something. But wanting something to be true and it being true are two different things." She set down her glass. "Isabella's family controls everything that matters in this region. Customs. Shipping. 3 ministries worth of political contacts. Half the major military contracts in 2 countries. She looked at me steadily. "The alliances your father spent 30 years building. You were not strong enough to hold those alliances together. Alejandro is. Or at least, he appeared to be. Appearances matter enormously in this world. And my father agreed to this?" I said. Her face shifted. Just slightly, a small change in the set of her mouth. "Your father tried to fight it at the end," she said. And then she looked away. I sat in my car outside Carmen's house for a very long time after that. The engine ran. The heater blew warm air. The lights of the city spread out below me in the valley like something beautiful that had nothing to do with me. Her words kept replaying. "Your father tried to fight it at the end." But that did not fit. None of it fit with what I knew of him. My father had spent 15 years preparing me. Teaching me to read contracts, to understand what was between the lines, to negotiate without showing what you needed. Watch their hands, not their words, he used to tell me. Hands always tell the truth. He had brought me into meetings when I was 19, sat me in the back to observe and learn. By 23 I was running entire accounts. By 28 he was asking my opinion before making major decisions. He had trusted me with everything that mattered. So why would he replace me? Unless he had not actually agreed to it. Unless he had tried to stop it and failed. Unless someone had stopped him from stopping it. I started the car and drove home. This time I went directly to my father's study, the room Carmen had told me repeatedly to clear out after the funeral, the room I had kept putting off entering because it still smelled like him, like paper and coffee and the specific soap he had used for 40 years. I pulled books off the shelves. Opened drawers. Checked behind picture frames, beneath desk mats, inside boxes of old files. I did not know exactly what I was looking for. But my father had never done anything without a reason, and he had never left a situation without building himself a way out. He had taught me that too. There had to be something. I found it behind a false panel in his desk drawer. A thin gap in the wood that you would only notice if you were pressing on exactly the right spot and looking for it. Inside, wrapped in plain cloth, was a leather journal. No dates printed on the cover. Just entries written in my father's precise, unhurried script. I sat down on the floor of his study with the journal in my lap and began to read. Names I recognized. Payment amounts. Dates going back a decade. But these were not ordinary business transactions. Next to each name was a note, an infraction, a secret, a crime. Insider trading. A bribed judge. A safety inspection delayed for 6 months that had subsequently resulted in an accident. A shipment of goods through customs that never should have cleared. Each entry was leverage. Each name in that journal belonged to someone who could be destroyed by what was written beside it. I kept reading, faster now, my heart picking up rhythm. Then I found an entry that made me stop breathing entirely. Isabella Reyes, marriage contract, terms negotiated with family. And below it, in the same neat handwriting, contingency, son will be phased out within 24 months. My marriage had been planned from the beginning with an expiration date already set. It took me an hour to find my father's old laptop in a box in the garage. Carmen had missed it when she cleared out his office. It took another hour to crack his password, his mother's birthday, backwards, the way he always did things that needed to be both memorable and not obvious. The desktop was dense with files. Spreadsheets, contracts, encrypted documents. I worked through them methodically, making notes, building a picture. Then I found a folder labeled Seguro. Insurance. Inside was a single audio file. Dated 3 weeks before my father died. I clicked play. My father's voice filled the garage. He sounded tired in a way I had not heard while he was alive, as if whatever he was doing in that recording was costing him something significant. If you're hearing this, he said slowly, measuring each word, then I failed. I tried to get us out. Tried to begin dismantling what I had built, piece by piece, quietly. But they wouldn't let me go. You can't just walk away from something like this. I should have known that from the beginning. A pause. I could hear him breathing. I held my own breath. I won't let them use my son. I won't let him become what I became. I won't let him spend 30 years building something that eats him alive. He deserves a different kind of life. He deserves to actually choose. Then another voice entered the recording. Clear. Cold. Immediately familiar. Carmen. You don't walk away from this, she said. You know the rules better than anyone. You helped write them. He deserves better than this, my father said. Whatever mistakes I made, he didn't make them. He doesn't owe this thing anything. He'll have whatever life we decide to give him, Carmen said. Just like you did. Just like everyone in this does. The recording ended. The garage was completely silent. I played it 4 more times. listening to every word, every pause, every shift in their voices. My father had known what was coming. He had tried to protect me and Carmen had blocked him. Told him it was not his decision to make. That I belonged to the network the way he did. My father had died 3 months after that recording. The doctors had ruled it a heart attack. Natural causes, they said. He was 59 but had been under extraordinary stress, and stress does terrible things to the heart. There had been no autopsy. Carmen had said an autopsy would be disrespectful, an indignity after everything he had built, everything he had given. I sat in the dark garage with the laptop on my knees and let myself think the thought I had been avoiding since the moment I found the recording. What if it was not natural? What if they had killed him because he was trying to get me out? Because he was building an exit? Because he had started saying no? The thought did not make me panic. It made me extraordinarily still. Clarity. That was the word for what I felt. A cold, total clarity that cleared away everything that was not useful. I spent 3 full days building a complete map of the network using the journal and the laptop files together. Every family. Every connection. Every transaction. Every piece of leverage held over every person. My father had been meticulous because he was building something specific, not just records, but an architecture. A way to bring the whole thing down if he ever needed to, or a way to control it from a position of absolute knowledge. He had died before he could use either option. Now I had it all. The files showed 12 major families operating across 3 countries. Isabella's family, the Reyes, controlled shipping and customs throughout the northern coast. The Dominguez family held military contracts and procurement. The Torres family had cultivated relationships with the judiciary across 3 provinces over 20 years. My father's role had been information. He was the one they all trusted to hold the records, to be the neutral party, the archivist of everyone's worst secrets. Which meant that I now held leverage over every single one of them. I made 3 copies of everything. Stored them in 3 separate locations I chose carefully. Then I started making calls. Quiet, measured calls to people on the outer edges of the network, people who had owed my father favors, people who had reasons to be uneasy about the direction things were moving under Carmen's arrangement. I did not threaten. I asked questions. I mentioned things I knew. I allowed them to understand the shape of what I had. The first person to reach out was Senora Dominguez. She called my cell at 11 at night, no greeting, no preamble. "We should talk," she said. We met the next morning at her office in the financial district. She was a small woman in her 60s who had the stillness of someone who had survived a great deal and learned to move slowly because of it. She studied me across her desk for a long moment before speaking. "Your father was a good man," she said finally. "What was done to you was not right. I want you to know I said that at the time. But you let it happen," I said. She nodded without flinching. "Because I believed what they told me. That you were too soft for this. Too emotional. That you would fall apart under real pressure." She leaned forward slightly. "But weak men do not map an entire network in 3 days. Weak men do not identify exactly which calls to make and make them in exactly the right order. Weak men do not sit across from me right now with this particular expression on their face." "What do you want from me?" I asked. "I want to know what you want," she said simply. I told her. Simply and directly. No theater. She smiled slowly. "Your father would be very proud." One by one, over the following 2 weeks, they came. The families. The partners. The people who had watched Carmen and Alejandro push me out of that conference room and had said nothing. They came not out of guilt but out of self-interest, which is the only currency that actually works in a world built on leverage. I was not Carmen. I was not Alejandro. I had no desire to run the network in the traditional sense, to sit at the center of it, managing and directing and accumulating. I wanted something more durable than that. I wanted to be the person no one could afford to move against. I offered deals. Stability. The guarantee that their secrets would stay where they were as long as they left me alone and kept their commitments. Leverage for leverage. The only language that meant anything. Alejandro began losing support in the second week. Senor Torres withdrew his family's backing without explanation. The Dominguez family followed. 2 smaller families shifted without any contact from me at all. They simply read the direction of things and made their decisions. I heard through Senora Dominguez that Alejandro was holding emergency meetings that were not going well. That Carmen was making threats she no longer had the backing to carry out. That Isabella's family was quietly reconsidering which way to align themselves. But the shift had already happened. Networks like this one run on 2 things, leverage and trust. I had constructed a position with more of both than anyone else at the table. 3 weeks after the day Isabella kissed Alejandro in front of everyone and I drove home in silence and found the divorce papers waiting in a nightstand drawer, I received a formal request for a meeting. From Carmen. Through Senor Vargas. I made her wait 20 minutes in the lobby before I came down. When I walked into the conference room, she stood up. All of them stood, Carmen, Alejandro, Isabella, Senor Vargas. I had never seen Carmen stand for anyone in my life. I took a moment to note it before I sat down. I took the chair at the head of the table. Alejandro sat across from me and would not make eye contact. Isabella sat beside him, picking carefully at her thumbnail. Carmen sat at the far end, still trying to hold herself with authority, but I could see the tension in her shoulders, in the way she held her hands flat on the table. "You've been making moves," Carmen said. "Yes," I said. "Building alliances. Restructuring relationships." "Yes. That kind of activity creates instability. For everyone." I looked at her steadily. Not as much instability as killing my father created. The room went completely silent. Not the polite silence of a pause but the absolute silence of people who have stopped breathing. Alejandro's head came up. Isabella went still. Carmen's face did not change. But her hands pressed harder against the table. "You cannot prove that," she said quietly. "I don't need to prove it," I said. "I just need people to wonder. To question. To start asking each other what they actually know about how he died and why there was no autopsy. Doubt is enough. Doubt is more than enough in a world where everyone is already watching everyone else." Senor Vargas cleared his throat and straightened his papers. "Perhaps we might discuss terms. A structured settlement of some kind. An arrangement that addresses everyone's interests going forward." "I don't need a settlement," I said. "Then what do you want?" Carmen asked. Her voice was quiet now. Different from every other time I had heard it. I looked at each of them in turn. Alejandro, trying to look composed and not quite managing it. Isabella, studying the table. Carmen, calculating to the last. "I want what you tried to take from me," I said. "All of it." The formal transfer of control took 6 weeks. There were no dramatic announcements. No ceremonies. Just the quiet movement of papers, the redirection of votes, the rewriting of access and authority. Alejandro stepped down from his position, citing personal reasons in a brief written statement that no one questioned. Carmen's role was reduced to a non-voting advisory capacity with no actual authority over anything. Isabella's family maintained their business relationships through the network, but now those relationships ran through me. I did not move into my father's old office. I kept the smaller one I had always used, 2 floors down, with a window that looked out over the courtyard instead of the skyline. But when I spoke in meetings now, people listened in a different way. The way you listen to someone who controls something you need. I met with each family personally. Made it clear that the old methods were changing. No more children used as instruments of negotiation. No more marriages arranged as financial transactions between people who had no idea what they were actually agreeing to. Senora Dominguez told me later that people had begun calling me El Heredero Silencioso. The silent heir. Because I did not make speeches. I did not issue warnings. I did not perform. I simply held what I held, and everyone could feel the weight of it. I saw Isabella one more time, at a charity event 3 months later. She was there with Alejandro. They stood near each other but not close, not touching, barely speaking. Each of them turned slightly away from the other in the way of people who have found themselves bound to something they would not have chosen with full information. She saw me across the room. Her face went pale. She said something quickly to Alejandro, who looked over and then looked away just as quickly. I did not approach them. I watched for a moment and then turned back to my conversation. Later that evening, Señora Dominguez appeared at my elbow. Her family is struggling, she said quietly. Without the protection Carmen provided, they're exposed in ways they did not anticipate. Customs authorities have been looking quite closely at certain shipping operations. Did you arrange that? I asked. She smiled into her glass. I simply stopped preventing it. And Alejandro? Consulting work somewhere. Considerably less comfortable than he was used to. She glanced toward Carmen, who was not present. Carmen is living quietly on the estate. A very nice house. No power. No influence. Just a widow with good furniture and a great deal of time to think. I nodded. Good. Your father would be proud, she said. You did what he could not. He tried to dismantle it, I said. I'm controlling it instead. Control is better, she said. Smarter and more durable. Destruction leaves a vacuum. Control leaves a structure. 1 year after the day everything changed, I returned to my father's grave. It was an early morning in spring, cool and quiet, the light still low. No one else was there. I stood in front of the headstone for a long time without speaking. Diego Herrera. Beloved father and friend. I found the recordings, I said, finally. I found everything you left. I know what you were trying to do. I know why you died. The wind moved through the trees around the cemetery in a long, slow exhale. I couldn't destroy it the way you wanted, I continued. I thought about it. But it's too big, too interconnected. Tearing it down would have left wreckage that hurt people who had nothing to do with any of this. So I did the other thing. I made it mine. I changed the rules from the inside. The things you were most afraid of, I made sure they can't happen anymore. At least not the way they happened to us. A bird landed on the iron fence nearby. I watched it for a moment. Carmen was right that I was emotional, I said. She was right that I was not ready for what your company actually was. But she was wrong about what that meant. I put my hand on the cold stone. You used to say that weak people become strong when they have no other option. That the ones who survive are the ones who stay awake when everyone else is celebrating and stop looking for easy explanations. I stood there for a while longer in the quiet. They hid the truth about your company, I said finally. About what you had really built. About what it cost you. About what it was going to cost me. I paused. But in the end, they handed all of it to the one person they had decided was too weak and too sentimental to survive it. I smiled. Not happy, exactly. But clear. They were wrong about that too. I walked back to my car and drove away from the cemetery into the morning. I had meetings that afternoon. Families to manage. Decisions to make. Secrets to keep and debts to collect in a network that ran on information and trust and the very specific kind of fear that comes from knowing someone holds your worst mistakes in a folder somewhere. My father had built it in the shadows, believing he could control it, not fully understanding until the end what it had made him. Carmen and her allies had tried to steal it. Alejandro had tried to run it. Isabella's family had tried to own a piece of it through me without letting me know that was what they were doing. None of them had understood what my father had actually created. He had built leverage. Pure, comprehensive, perfectly documented leverage. The most durable kind of power that exists, the kind that works quietly, without drama, without spectacle. The kind that does not need to announce itself because everyone already knows it is there. He had built it. Carmen had tried to redirect it. Alejandro had sat in my chair and picked up my red pen and thought it was already his. But it was mine now. All of it.